Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining this HARP session. My name is Nayeli Palacios. I'm a lecturer in education at the University of Manchester, and I will be facilitating this session. Today's topic is titled, "The Map is Not the Territory When Research Plans Meet Real Life." Through this topic, the panelists will reflect on the friction that occurs when the research plan is disrupted by the messiness of reality. Let's meet our panelists. First joining us is Dr. Dian Huang, SID alumna of the University of Manchester. Next, we have Dr. Ignacio Wyman, senior tutor in the Manchester Institute of Education at this same university. Also joining us live is Dr. Rebecca Simpson-Hargreaves, Senior Lecturer in Education at the University of Manchester. And last but not least, Dr. Miguel Antonio Lim, Senior Lecturer in Education at the University of Manchester. To kick us off, I'd like to invite Dr. Dian Huang to share her story with the topic. Over to you, Dian.
Thank you very much for inviting me. And just a quick self-introduction. My name is Dian, and I just finished my PhD in education, and I got my PhD awarded just last month. So I just finished this long and tiring journey, and of course I have lots of stories that can be shared. But echoing today's theme, I want to share a short story that I had during my data collection stage. So just a big background of what I did for my PhD. So it was a longitudinal study. By longitudinal study means I need to collect data from the same participants several times during a period of time. So for my research, I need to collect my data every month from my participants for 1 year, and I need to interview them for 3 times during this year. So it's quite a engagement demanding project. Because it requires my participants to do so much, I had a really difficult time in recruiting participants, as you can see, because obviously due to the ethical considerations, I can't really offer them any incentives or offer them anything out of my own ability. And I require them to share their stories, share their experience with me every month, and have a really long talk every 3 to 4 months. So I was only able to recruit a few participants, like 5 or 6 participants that meets my research criteria. Therefore, for all the participants, I really value their participation, and I really cannot afford losing their participation because my research focused on their experience from the beginning to the end of their studies. So if they decide to quit, of course, I cannot really force them to participate. But if they leave my study, then I really cannot finish my PhD on time because I need that much data to support a project at PhD level. Right, so then I have one participant who is a working professional. That means he was really busy, but he was really kind to agree to participate in my study. So in the interview stages, for our first interview, we firstly agree on a time at evening, at very late evening, like 9 or 10 p.m. in UK time, and say, okay, so we can have 1 hour interview. But when I just like sitting here at night waiting for him, and he didn't show up, and I was so worried and so annoyed, and I sent him an email asking, is everything okay? Why didn't you show up? And he said, oh, sorry, I just forgot about it. Shall we reschedule it to a weekend? I'm always free at weekend afternoons. I said, oh, that's okay. So shall we meet at like on Saturday afternoon, so that if that's okay? And he said, yeah, of course. So we just schedule another interview on a Saturday afternoon, like 2 or 3 p.m. And I think that's a good time because obviously it's a weekend. I can still like have a good time out with my friends and family like in the evening. And again, he didn't show up. At this time I was it was a bit upset. Like I really value his participation, and he has confirmed with me twice that he could participate, but eventually he didn't show up. And well, but life goes on. So I went to the party as I have planned with my family and friends at an evening, and during our dinner, he sent me an email said, okay, I'm sorry, I was busy this afternoon and I was not able to tell you, but I am free now. Can we do the interview now? I say, right, but I'm not at home. Can you give me 30 minutes so I can rush back home and let's do the interview? So I just need to I just told my friends and family, said, I'm sorry, but I have to leave. I have a participant waiting for me to do the interview. And yeah, so I went back home and I did the interview with him. It was a really nice talk, and he really enjoyed the conversation with me. And as a result, like he kept participate for the entire year. We maintained a really good relationship. And yeah, and he provided some of the very valuable and very key data for my PhD. Yeah, so basically, and it was a really difficult experience, I would say. And you will really struggle when things didn't happen as planned, particularly in my case, because I'm a social science researcher. So my research involves with other people, and I cannot really control what other people think, or what they do, or if they would say something bad, or if they would do something bad, or if they decide to leave my research, that sort of thing. But yeah, but I would say from my own perspectives, I sacrifice some of my own time. Sometimes I can relax, sometimes I can spend with my families, I can go with my friends, I can have a really nice personal life. But as a result, I think those sacrifice worth it, and they pays off. So because I didn't do anything. I couldn't do everything as planned. So I had to invest some of the time that I didn't really think of to be sacrificed to do my research. But because you see, I just finished my PhD, and I think those sacrifices worth it. I really appreciate. I would say appreciate those pains and those lost of the personal things. But yeah, I think that's just what every researcher may do, and yeah, those difficulties.
I can really hear, the exhaustion that you describe when, you invest your time, you invest even your weekends, and that frustration that comes with, when your efforts are not met with the same commitment from others. But also the feelings of, perseverance, doing your best, investing is your project, you need to make it work. And yeah, I appreciate you bringing those feelings to our conversation. Thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to invite Dr. Ignacio Wyman to share his experience on today's topic. Are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. Over to you.
Thank you. My experience, as well as Diane's, also comes from my PhD research, and also involves recruiting participants, which I guess is a very common challenge in any research, really. But the reason why was a significant moment for me is because I felt like it was the first time in my doctoral journey where I felt like the fate of my research was in some way out of my control. So until then, this was my second year of my PhD. In my project, I was interested in collaboration between schools. So my plan was to interview school head teachers and basically ask them whether they have any collaborative relationship with other schools around and what was the content of those relationships. So I needed interview participants. I needed school head teachers back in Chile. And until then, this was my second year of PhD. Everything was fine, so I had no issue really with settling in my PhD. I think I had a good, coherent, strong research design by then. Everything was running as planned. I already had a pilot experience, which went well. I had some experiences in a couple of academic conferences. So yeah, I felt confident that at least from or within an academic environment, my research made sense, and that was very comforting. And then I had this plan to go abroad and start my field work. So it was time to reach out to potential candidates, participants, and to plan that I got in touch with the local authorities back in Chile, and I got the support from them saying, yes, we are aware of your research and we support you in whatever you need to do. They gave me contact details and supporting letters saying, basically for me to email this head teacher saying, well, your line manager basically supporting me in this. I also had a relationship with a university in the area where I used to work at. They were doing some research with those schools as well, and I managed to make my own research part of their broader research agenda. So I had that support as well. So I felt like I was very well prepared ahead of my fieldwork. I started sending emails and I got no responses. And with one or two schools who did respond to my invitation emails, I traveled. I went back to Chile, and yeah, it was a challenging moment. It was the first time I think I was putting my research ideas out there in a environment that wasn't necessarily an academic environment. So it was something different. I was reaching out to school head teachers who, well, they have some authority, some considerable authority in schools. They were very experienced professionals, all of them. Most of them were in the later stages in their careers. So they were these like powerful figures with some authority to make judgments about my research. So yeah, it was intimidating. I really cared about my research. I wanted it to go well. So I had these questions like, how do I convince people to participate? How do I make my research sound interesting, appealing? Will they be willing to spare some time for me? Why will they bother? That's, I think, it was the main question I had all the time when I was during this period. They were busy, of course. It was the end of the academic year in Chile. And I had this idea of, well, they were busy dealing with real issues, and it was me asking for an hour of their time with a project that maybe I didn't know wouldn't make sense to them. So yeah, I had all these questions, and they weren't responding to my emails. So it made things more worrying. for me. In the end, everything went well. I had to be I had to be flexible with my approach. I instead of keeping up with emails, I decided to go to the schools. I was already there in the area, so I was prepared. I had all my um, um, letters and documents printed, and I went to every single school, handing in my invitations and explaining my research. And yeah, in the end, it went well. I got a good number of participants. Obviously, not everyone in the area participated, but I got a very good number. And yeah, nothing really went wrong. I think it was an experience that was not scary, but challenging just because of the nature of the experience. This idea of like my research being not entirely under my control, making it visible to a non-academic audience, and having to change my approach to getting people to participate. But in the end, it was a good experience, I think. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. I put here in my notes, putting yourself out there. That is a phrase that resonates with me a lot. So thank you for sharing that experience. It does talk about that vulnerability of, showing your thoughts to a different audience and see what they, if it's something relevant to them. Because at the end of the day, it's out of your control. It was out of your control to see whether they would engage with it or not. So thank you for putting that out there. But also, as Diane, that perseverance of you need to make this work. It's your project, and how you got there. That is amazing. Thank you very much for sharing. To continue our conversation, I'd like to invite Dr. Rebecca Simpson-Hargreaves to share her story. Are you ready?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for
Thank
inviting
you.
me. So very similar to both. This is going to be about my PhD journey. Again, just like Diane, I completed this year as well. So we're recently quite battered, but there in the end. So my kind of initial challenge was, well, I say initial, I was saying one of my biggest challenge actually was when I was getting towards the end. So it was when I was during my analysis phase. So I initially thought I was on a really clear, really straightforward path. I thought I was doing a case study. I thought I'd use thematic analysis. On paper, it all seemed made to make sense. I'd done my pilot. It had worked really well for that. But then, I thought it would carry on. So when I collected my main data, unfortunately, COVID hit, and but I was still quite confident that I had 3 different schools that would be able to give me 3 different sort of views on what I was looking at. So I was looking at children's perceptions on human rights values through picture books. So I needed to be in school, and I managed to negotiate with more local schools. I was going to do it over the UK, but I felt quite confident. I expected it to be straightforward. Collecting the data was, believe it or not, I was kind of having to shield myself in between and not leave the house, and all of that was absolutely fine. But really, the biggest hiccup, which I didn't expect, was when I was analysing my data. So I felt very much that I had to use a computer program. I felt very much that I needed to use NVivo. I'd gone on an NVivo course. I was really excited, and I just couldn't get my head around it. And I'm really good with IT, but for me, it just didn't. I couldn't see the children in there. I participate. And I was thinking, right, well, maybe it's just me. Maybe, I'm not doing it so well. I tried my reflexive thematic analysis, and what had worked on my pilot just wasn't working at all. And I spent a long period trying to make it work, looking at the different parts of data that I'd collected. And most of the summer, I just felt really lost and unsure. I was really frustrated. If I was completely honest, I was really annoyed with the whole thing. I think my husband probably and my children were probably sick of seeing me maybe cry and say, I'm just going to quit. And I had reached that point where I just thought, I can't do this anymore. I can't do it. This isn't what I wanted it to be. I'm just going to stop. Do I really need to do this for my own mental health and well-being? But the other half of me is really stubborn. So, and I come from a long line of Spanish women who who are very strong-willed, and I kind of was like kind of drawing on that matriarchal line, and I just thought, no, I won't let it beat me. So even though I felt like I'd wasted a year, the more and the more I'd worked with the data, the more I felt like I'd drifted away from the original purpose of my study. I think I got to that point where I just thought, okay, well, what can I do about it instead of whining? What am I going to do? So I thought, where's the pressure coming from to shape my research into something using a way that I thought wasn't going to work? It certainly wasn't from my supervisors, and it certainly wasn't from, the research academic community. Maybe it was reading too many research books that were saying, oh, use this, it'll be great. But obviously the pressure was coming from myself. I felt like there had to be the right way to do it. So I then became really reflective, and I just thought, well, actually, what are my strengths? What are the things that I know? And what is it that I really care about? And for me, instead of using the schools as the case study, it was the children. Um, it was their voices, what they thought. So initially I was saying, well, in this school, this is what the children thought. I thought, well, actually, no, there was just so much variation in what was coming out from what the children were saying. It wasn't straightforward, and coding was just losing that voice altogether. It hadn't got kind of the nuance behind it. So, like I said, what do I know? I used to be a primary school teacher, so I understand kind of speaking with children and listening to them. And like you were saying right at the beginning, it's that really effective listening, isn't it, that we have? And what do I really know a lot about as well, which is children's literature. So, as I said, I reminded myself of how important child voice was to me, how much I felt like it needed to be at the center of my research. And I gave myself permission to change my mindset and to take that risk, to move beyond the box that I thought I needed to be in terms of analysis. So I started to rethink my approach. I printed off all my transcripts, which there's 45, there's a fair amount of them. I sat down on the floor. I had a pack of highlighters, colored pencils, post-its, and I just set to work. And it was so valuable. And it was, for me, that's just the way it worked for me. I could close my eyes and I could just see the scene in my head. I could hear the children's voices. And what really came through is the impact of our conversations together, but also their conversations with each other when they were doing the focus group elements, and how the sense that I got from how they were interacting with the text and myself and with the whole research process itself. So I ended up developing my own analytical framework, and it was, I guess when you look at it, it's quite overly complicated, but so I integrated multiple methods. So I integrated a reader response literary analysis with narrative analysis to analyze the interviews. And then I did visual analysis on some pages that they created. They created their own pages based on human rights they felt were missing from the book. And then I also did poetic inquiry. So when I had the transcripts from the focus groups, and I looked at one question which was looking at, well, what is it that we want people to know about this? Why? How do we feel about this? So I thought I love poetry, and I really wanted this bit to be really strong, just the child's voice. So I cut up the transcript and I created poems. I did myself reading the poems from it, which was really lovely. It shifted at that point. I felt confident. I actually was enjoying the process, and that's something my supervisors kind of really took on board. They were like, wow, you actually seem to be happy enjoying this. Not that I was miserable all the time, but for me, that worked really, really well. And then actually what I did was, from that poetic inquiry, I was about 4 months before submission, I then did an extra bit of data collection. I went into a school working with 5 and 6 year olds, and I used the book in the same way. I asked the questions in the same way, and then they created the poems out of their own transcript. I'd cut it up for them. I'd printed it out, and they chose how to do it. So that was just before submission. So at the time, I felt like I'd lost a year. But actually, looking back, that period, as hard as it was actually where my real intellectual work happened. It gave me a real sense of ownership over the research. So by the time I reached my viva, I felt really confident in what I was trying to say and the methods and the analysis, because it truly felt like mine. The examiners commented on how reflexive and honest and transparent was. And that really reinforced that making that change had been the right decision. It taught me that, research is not about following that perfect plan. I don't think there is a perfect plan. It's being comfortable with that uncomfortableness. I think Dr. Laura Black told me that you have to be comfortable with feeling uncomfortable and unsure, and it allowed me to be really responsive and reflective. So I guess the takeaway is, do be confident in yourself, really, and what you think might be right for you. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much for that story, that experience. It's very inspiring to hear how you move from that place of self-doubt to reclaiming that sense of ownership over your work. Thank you very much for sharing. And finally, I will play the video recording that Dr. Miguel Antonio Lim has shared with us.
Thank you to Nelly and the organizers of this HARP event for the invitation to speak and to share a little personal story about how expectations met reality, and how my own life experience, how my own, and I'm sure many other lived experiences don't always go according to plan. I think it's a great great thing to share, that sometimes things don't always seem as well planned or as smooth as they might seem from the outside. So just to get go straight into a little story on my part about how some of my own experiences in previous my own previous experiences about previous research and really study plans didn't turn out to be exactly how I had expected them. So just a little bit about myself. So perhaps, as you know from the event announcement, my name is Miguel Antonio Lim. I work here. I teach on the MA International Education. I'm convener of the co-convener of the Higher Education Research and Scholarship Group. I'm a senior lecturer in Education and International Development. But I'm originally from the Philippines, and I studied there for, well, I did my first degree there. And the Philippines has a it's a very interesting country. It has a very interesting colonial history as well. Part of that colonial history was under the Spanish Empire. So the Philippines was, shall we say, the Spanish, main Spanish colony or outpost in Asia. But later on, it became part of the American Commonwealth. So it also experienced a period of American colonization. So because of these two experiences, I think there's a deep-rooted orientation to the West. Some might think, or some refer to it as a colonial mentality, thinking that things in the West, in Europe or in the US, were better. Like the technology was better, or the products was better, the lives were better, the education was better, and the people were better. And then, of course, I know now that we have to be more critical about these assumptions or these stereotypes. But that was the kind of social atmosphere, and for a very long time, because the Philippines was under Spanish rule for over 300 years, and for American rule for almost 50 years. So it was quite a long time. And this is linked to some of these expectations that I mentioned with regard to research and also to education, that I had these kind of assumptions that, oh, like universities and international education would be so much um, better or different, you know, that people would be like it. The expression I think in one of the metaphors is that the streets are paved in gold, you know, or that America is the land of milk and honey. So, I mean, that's one of the expectations that they had, that studying abroad would be perfect. There would be no problems, that, you know, like you would learn everything that you needed and that you would have all the resources that you would have. Um, just like many other students in the Philippines, I thought that studying in the US, because that was the most recent period of colonization, and also, you know, because of the reputation of American higher education, that that was the you know, the best option, right? Like go and study in the US. But my parents told me very early on that, you know, this was impossible. They could never afford to support even with a scholarship, you know, like there were just some expenses that could not be that they could not support with regard to going to study abroad. So I did my first degree in the Philippines, but later on, you know, I worked there for a while and I did get a scholarship and I did study in Europe, which was linked to some of the other, you know, like personal interests of mine. And well, my first degree was in economics, and eventually I ended up in Paris, and then I moved to London. And in London, you know, I did a master's and I started a PhD in what I would say is the most well-known university or department for my field, you know, like, you know, economics, accounting, finance, and public policy. And I had so many ideas and research plans, and because it was funded, I had to also follow the, you know, like a little bit the desire of the funder. You know, like I proposed a project that was aligned to um, to the interests or the like the research aims of the funder of the scholarship in a way. So, and it was great. I was there, you know, like it was a really um, you know, like good institution. Many of you are perhaps studying or experiencing UK higher education, you know, the positive points, you know, there's a lot of independence. You can do whatever you want, and mostly you have a lot of resources in terms of um, going to the library and finding out what you will, you know, like what you need and people advising you. But this was a little bit different from, again, my expectations coming from a different academic system. I felt a little bit lost because I guess the Filipino system, and to some extent, my impression is the American system is there's a lot more guidance, for instance, from the supervisor. It's more structured rather than this big open question and you do whatever you want. So those were some, I guess, like some differences in my expectations versus the reality of, okay, like now you have to do this big project, and if you need any help, you know, like here are all the people that you can ask. But I did feel a little bit lost towards the start. Most people say that the PhD is a lonely journey, but I mean, I guess that that saying exists for a reason, and that many people experience this um, academic loneliness. You know, that you're with your project by yourself. You know, sometimes you're trying to be a specialist in that project, so there are not really other people who are doing the same project as you because each of you are trying to make an original contribution. At the same time, there's also personal loneliness that I thought, oh, even in a good cohort or good group of people, you know, like I was in a big city and, you know, London, very fast paced. So that was also it was exciting, but I guess it was a mix of emotions to be in, I would say, like, as I said, like one of the best institutions to do that research. But I felt a little bit strange that I wasn't entirely like comfortable or happy, even though I'd shall we say, right, like gotten this opportunity to be in that institution and to be doing my, you know, like my research there. should have been a dream from the outside for someone who was interested in social sciences at one of the top institutions in social sciences. From the inside, seemed like, oh, okay, you see how things are in the kind of like the real world where, you know, like sometimes you feel lost or you don't know who to turn to, or you feel afraid of asking for help because you think, well, everyone around me is really so intelligent. What will they think of me if I keep on asking silly questions? I know a little bit better now that, you know, like, I mean, we all need to ask help and to ask questions, and that I also know that like what is really amazing, what seems amazing from the outside, every institution or every situation has its own challenges. But to cut a long story short, so I moved to a different institution, different project. Again, I was very lucky to have another big funded project, to a project that was, I would say, like much more um, with a much more structure in terms of like the way that the project was designed. I was with a much bigger team, and I felt that in the past I'd always worked better in teams before. So I moved to a big research project as part of a much bigger team with a lot more projects, with several kind of research supervisors, and I completed my PhD then. That was, wow, almost 15 years ago now. And I moved to Manchester 10 years ago, where I continue to work. So hopefully that was an interesting story to share, and I hope that you learned something from this experience.
Thank you very much, Miguel. Your story describes that deep sense of academic loneliness that is very common, and how by seeking out the connection of a research team, you move from that lost feeling of independence to the fulfillment and success that you found in collaboration. It's a wonderful reminder that we don't have to carry the weight of our research alone. As we bring this session to a close, I want to express my deep gratitude to the HARP panelists for sharing their stories. We hope that this session has offered you a space to reflect, to feel a sense of belonging, and to recognize that shared humanity in the research journey. It's a goodbye for now.